Good afternoon, my name's Clinton. I'm from Australia. You would have heard from my colleague this morning. Our Australian government has had a big push for lifelong learning. As you can see there, they had a government report that they wanted lifelong learning. They wanted some policy changes so that it changes, or rather the way we do things, because of the change in the world economy caused by new technology and the rate of economic globalisation. To give you an example, our manufacturing industry in Australia is shrinking. As of this year, we no longer manufacture cars. It's just closing down this year, so we have to find jobs for approximately 50,000 workers that are now out of a job. So where I'm from, if you weren't here this morning, Central Queensland University. This is basically Central Queensland, but we have expanded all over Australia. You can see there the portion of our students. We are a dual sector university, so that's vocational education and higher education. Officially, we don't have two tiers of universities in Australia like the previous talker was discussing. In reality, we do. Just officially, we don't. And yes, I'm from one of those high teaching universities. So that is, I think we have a ratio of 33:1 student to staff. At some of the more prestigious universities that is research intensive, it's more like 1:20 or 1:18. Which means we're time poor. When you have to deal with more students than other universities, it tends to take up your research time. So about our education program, in particular I work for STEPS, which is a bridging access enabling program for non-traditional students. That is usually if they don't come straight from high school into university, or if they're second chance learners. It's a large distance cohort. As part of that, they study, there's actually 3 levels of maths, 2 writing, and a preparatory course for skills, learning skills. And then there's 3 science courses for obviously physics, bio, chem, depending on what area they're going into. So in 2012, the Australian government introduced the basically learning or earning policy, which means for those under 25, you have to study something or work, else you won't receive unemployment benefits. Okay, that can still be a Certificate 1 at vocational education, or it can be bachelor degree, but you have to study something else. They won't give you unemployment benefits. In Australia, that's called youth allowance if you're under 25. You can see there our youth unemployment rate, that is under 25, as opposed to the national rate there. I should also state that STEPS is a free program, so it doesn't cost anything and you don't incur any debts as part of that, as opposed to higher ed, which we have a higher education loan scheme. We actually now, if you go to vocational education, or what we call TAFE, you also incur a loan, or a HEX debt as we call it. So as we said there, overall our students are 63% mature age. In Australia, that's anything that's not straight from school into university is considered mature age. So just by comparison, 47% are aged over 25 years, just to separate out those there. One of the consequences of that policy is that our average age of our students has dropped about 5 years because they have to study something in order to get unemployment benefits. So STEPS is free, they come to us, as opposed to TAFE, you have to pay, or if you can get straight into higher ed, you still have to pay. So you can see approximately a 40% increase in numbers. Also, our government wants, one of the policies is to try and get the universities to engage with industry and try and have placements. Other talkers have said about that this morning. We actually do, as part of the undergrad programs, we have paid work placement. You have 2 6-month blocks if you study engineering, 6 months if you study IT or sport and exercise science. Hence, our university has a rather high employment rate, luckily enough. In engineering, it's 100%. There are obviously nursing, teaching still have placements as part of it, you just don't get paid. So too do radiography, sonography, all those allied health type ones also have placements up to about 6 weeks, you just don't get paid for it. We also have a social inclusion policy. So that is, yes, they want to increase the participation and want to have basically all Australians have equal opportunity to education. Many places in the world have this. Just to give you our university, basically because of these things, we also target those students. Our university has approximately 40% they're low socio-economic students. Community average is only about 25%, and in Australia it's about 15.7% participating in higher ed. The government's aiming for 20%, so we've got double that. You can see there, we're also roughly double Indigenous participation. Obviously, we're from a regional area, so hence the 78% regional, but we do have campuses in capital cities. As part of that social inclusion policy, they have specific funds set up for low SES students or students with disabilities to come. However, as a result of that, our teaching has to change because of that. Just to give one example, if we produce lectures or videos, they want them to be able to be transcribed for deaf students. That actually changes what you would say and or what you would include on the screen. So in many cases, we've had to do 2 lots. That's really annoying when you don't have the time. We also have internationalisation of the curriculum and indigenising of the curriculum. That is, you have to think about, because Australia has a large migrant population, is it just going to be Australians that can understand your examples, or will people from other cultures be able to understand it? We also have a policy there, it's just came in, international education. Australia is very big on international education. It's worth 20 billion there last year. It's about 36% of our export services. Hence there's a big push to internationalise the curriculum as well, which also means that you have to go and redesign a lot of your courses if you haven't already. Luckily enough, our university has actually been doing this for about 20 years, but it's now brought it in that basically every university in Australia has to. As a result of those policies, one of the things in 2009 was they uncapped the number of government-funded places to universities and said, offer as many places as you can cope with, we'll foot the bill. So they also had that, we wanted 40% of under 25-year-olds to have a degree. The result of that, which our government's now debating, is we have a massive budget problem because of the increase in number of students going to university. The left hand of the government didn't talk to the right hand and realised that that was going to mean we needed more money. Unfortunately, we have the government wants to implement measures to reduce that, but they can't get them passed through the legislation. And you can see there how much our amount that the government's having to fund it is increasing and is projected to increase if it continues on at the current rates. We also were going to uncapped the number of vocational education places. However, that's been put on hold due to those budget restrictions. So you actually had higher ed uncapped, but vocational education was capped. They wanted to have it all uncapped, but unfortunately the budget's not allowing for that. What that means is, yes, and I mentioned this before, our university changed their strategic plan to match up with the government policies. There's a couple of quotes from our Vice-Chancellor in the strategic plan. I won't bore you with all the details. What that has meant is, yes, our marketing changed to be towards lower socioeconomic students. Many prerequisites have been removed to get into degrees. Unfortunately, that means you have a lot more students with a wider range of skills coming in, and as the educator, we need to address those skill shortages. One of the government reports that was just released about 2 weeks ago, it actually wanted to compare the STEPS type entrance programs into university compared to those going through TAFE or other pathways. And basically it did find that the attrition rates or retention rates are better, at least in first year, for those coming through purely and simply access programs as opposed to others. Just to give you one statistic of that, this is for ours. My students that come through here, basically if they're going into engineering, had a better overall success rate than their cohort. So that is the high school leavers. Our actual STEP students performing better than high school leavers, which is quite unusual. It's usually the other way around. In conclusion, there are many policies affecting higher ed, particularly in Australia, and due to those budget blowouts, Australian policies will most likely change in the next couple of years. Thank you.